Hello, everyone. We are about to start the new webinar today with Evan Leybourn, and we're talking about business agility and the first steps to get there. On behalf of Toronto Agile community, I am Ardita Karai, and I want to thank also Peter Jake and Paul Henman, two volunteers that have helped me on setting up and organizing this webinar with Evan. Just quickly before we start, a little bit of housekeeping rules. Make sure your browser is set up properly, and any audio issues that you might have, check if you have other applications that might interfere. If there is any problem, try to log into another browser or log off and log on again. Another thing to mention is our sponsors. I want to thank these sponsors that you see on the screen here for their continued support on events that we do, and especially on the conference that is coming up. And stay tuned because there are news coming around the conference at the end of this webinar. So I know you are all here for Evan, so I want to start introducing him quickly and leave the floor to him so we all get to learn a little bit more about business agility. Evan is joining us from Singapore, so it is midnight there. And Evan, thank you so much for making time to be up so late and join us and share your thoughts with us. Very much appreciated. He is a very active member of the Agile community worldwide, and he helps in many ways, shapes and forms different organizations. And on top of that, he's a wonderful father. I love the comments you make on what you do with your daughter every day, and I don't know where you find all the time, but now that you are up at midnight talking to us, I'm getting a sense of you don't sleep.
Sadly true.
So, Evan, I want to leave the floor to you and make you a presenter here.
Can you see him?
I do.
Lovely. So I saw there was a great photo on LinkedIn just the other day. It's video conference bingo, and of course the #1 is, can you see my screen? So we'll see how many bingo cards we can get today. Thank you all very much for joining the conversation. Well, tonight for me, today for you. We're going to cover off a quite wide variety of different elements around business agility to give you what I call the art of the possible. The intent is to shape the conversation around how a company, how the entire organization can operate to be, well, in a word, agile. So, to use a phrase from Simon Sinek, well, let's start with why. Why is business agility relevant? Why do we care? And one of the best examples that I've got is this. This is the Fortune 100 from 1983 to 1984, 1985, so on and so forth, all the way through to 2013. In the 30 years, in one generation, that the 100 biggest companies in the United States, 57% of those companies no longer exist. Now, this is somewhat terrifying. Some of these are bankruptcies, some of these are mergers, some of these are acquisitions. An acquisition can be hostile. Some of these have gone through divestments and splits, and others have just shrunk in relevance. The company still exists, but they're no longer as large or as important as once they were. So when we're talking about business agility, you need to understand that this is not just a matter of capital A, agile outside IT. This is a survival imperative. This is the need for an organization to be adaptable, but not only to follow the market, but to lead the market. I'm going to talk a little bit about how organizations do this. Now, a lot of you listening are going to be traditional agilists, right? Familiar with Scrum and Kanban, less and safe, and I've literally just spent the last 3 days at the Scrum gathering in Singapore, so my head is full of capital A agile. But understand that many of those are the practices and the frameworks that we hold dear are not always 100% applicable to the rest of the organization. And so there's a mapping or a nuance that is required to make sure that what we do and how we do it aligns to, well, why. So I always start with apologies to Eli Goldratt, the theory of constraints, or in my case, Evan's theory of agile constraints. So the theory of constraints, for those of you who don't know, comes from the lean space, and is a very simple idea. It's a fascinating book called The Goal, which I recommend you read. And the theory of constraints says that in any process, there is a constraining factor, just one constraining factor, and the goal of an organization is to remove that constraining factor. But once you remove that constraining factor, there's another constraining factor somewhere in that flow, somewhere in that organization, in that process is a limitation to the flow of materials and production. Now, what is so compelling about this story is that as a metaphor, we can look at our organization not as a single value stream, but as a network, a pipeline of value streams coming together to create value for our customers. But somewhere in there is the constraint to our agility. So the theory of agile constraints is that in any organization, you can only be as agile as your least agile part. Now, I'm going to challenge you and I'm going to say that in most of your companies, that's probably not software anymore. Does that mean we're doing software agility perfectly? Goodness knows, right? Most organizations do agile pretty shockingly, but are they really? If we keep focusing on IT and software and improving, we can get software to be as agile as possible, but if our deployment engine is once every 3 months, then it doesn't matter how agile we are. Right? So, well, what do? Okay, we fix the constraint. All right, let's bring in DevOps. Great, now we have an engine, a development engine that can release change every 11.3 seconds. Brilliant. All right, now where's the constraining factor? Well, finance, is it HR? All right, we can deliver every 11 seconds, but we have a finance engine that changes every 18 months. Is that agility? And this is where business agility comes in, because if we take a systemic, holistic view of the entire organization beyond the core that is our software delivery team, we see that agility, right, can be everywhere and should be everywhere. So I want to focus very much on the diagram that you see in front of you. This is a model that was put together by the business agility community. There were about 60 contributors to this model trying to understand what is business agility. Now, the question I get asked very often is, well, how do you define business agility? Now, I think that's a cheating question, right? Because any definition that you give is, unless you get the soundbite right, that definition won't be compelling, right? A definition right, is compelling if it relates to what I need. Now, the problem with business agility is we're talking about something so broad that covers the entire world of work that there is no definition that would cover what is necessary. So instead of a definition, we created a model, a pattern. This is not a framework. This does not say how you do anything. This is saying, if you're going to be an agile organization, please don't forget these areas. Please do not forget that you need these 3 dimensions and these 9 domains of agility. And if you'll allow me to do the cardinal sin, I'm going to read off the slide. I'm going to talk a little bit of detail about what each of these are. Right? The work dimension defines how an organization does their work. Now, this should be familiar to all of you. Technical agility is the way a team creates something. Now, this is the realm of DevOps, of test-driven development, of XP. It's also the realm of beyond budgeting. So if I'm an accountant, my technical agility is not XP. My technical agility is the way that I work in an agile way, doing my accounting practices, and hence things like beyond budgeting. Process agility could be thought of as value stream agility. This is the realm of Scrum, of Kanban. This is where we take a process such as the software delivery lifecycle and we help that to become, well, in a word, agile. And I'll be honest, in most organizations, while process is a problem, the concept of process agility is well understood, partly because it's also easy to understand. Organizations around the world have spent decades defining and articulating process, and so it's easy for a manager to come in and say, well, we're going to be agile, we're going to streamline, and we're going to lean that process out. And that doesn't give us agility in and of itself. It just helps with the process. Enterprise agility is where that scales across the organization. The ways of working cross the divisional boundaries, cross the team boundaries. So it's more than just a single value stream. It is a network of value streams, a network of processes across HR and finance and sales and marketing. And this is the domain, to a limited extent, of SAFe and less, right? But also beyond budgeting. Also some of the other agile frameworks that look at the holistic or systemic organization. Now, the work dimension is one that, from an agility perspective, we have a fairly good handle on. Most organizations are working in this space. But this is where it gets problematic, because we're looking at only a subset of what is required. The connections dimension, these are the relationships that exist and the agility within those relationships. And these are absolutely critical, and organizations forget these all the time. Leadership agility defines the relationship between an individual or a team and authority. Now, that authority can be institutional or personal, but it defines how those people in authority act with agility. Servant leadership, leading from the middle. These are all characteristics of an agile leader. Structural agility is the relationship between teams, between individuals in the organization. At the far extreme, you have concepts like holacracy and teal organizations. These are good models, but I'll be honest and say that in today's world, 99.99% of companies will never become teal. Right? Now, does that mean they shouldn't strive for structural agility? No, of course they should. Structural agility is absolutely critical to make an organization agile. But the key here is to understand how agile can we do it, what is relevant. And we'll talk in some depth about this in a couple of minutes. Market agility is the relationship with the market, with the relationship with the supply chain, right? The customers and the clients on one end and your suppliers and vendors on the other. This is the relationships outside of the organization. We we think of market agility, and you might think of lean startup. Right? Now, lean startup is by no means the only model for market agility, but it is certainly one of the most seductive, one of the most compelling storylines for market agility. I'll spend very little time on the mindset and the culture dimension, partly because I really hope you understand what an agile culture, an agile mindset is. We articulate it in three ways: a learning organization, one that collaborates, and an organization that has ownership in work or takes accountability or pride in the work that you do. And we find that there was a lot of conversation in the community about these three, and in fact we spent more time on these three than the rest. Right? Technical, process, enterprise. There was some conversation about, well, what do we call it? Is it value stream? Is it process? Right? But those were pretty well understood. But the question about mindset and culture is, how do you articulate in a small number of concepts what it is? And so we had things like continuous improvement, we had all sorts of concepts in there, but we ended up thinking continuous improvement is the expression of learning, which is why we only have learning there. If you are, and for my sins, I used to be a project manager, right? And not a waterfall one. That's right, and not an agile one. That's a waterfall. Prince 2 was my project management method of choice, and for those of you who don't know Prince 2, we would commonly refer to it as death by templates, because everything in Prince 2 is a template. And so what we would try and do is we would try and, at the end of a project, we'd run our lessons learned workshop. But what would happen is that nothing would be learned. We would write down all those lessons. They'd be stuck in a filing cabinet somewhere, which we affectionately called the $1 million filing cabinet, because we literally spent millions of dollars writing documents. Right? And that was good. We had the documents, we had the lessons, but no learning. So we would call that lessons observed rather than lessons learned. So a learning organization is actually quite critical. It's one that actually learns and actually applies that learning. And that's one that we want to try and create. So hoping this all makes sense, and obviously because I'm the only one talking, I don't have any feedback, so I'm hoping you're nodding there in your rooms and going, ah, that makes sense. If it doesn't, please ask your questions.
Yes, everyone ask questions if you want more on certain areas. Laurie, for example, asked a little bit about the 99% of organizations. You mentioned the teal organization. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more around that.
Well, that I certainly can. That's actually the next slide.
Okay.
So for those of you who have read Lalou's book, right, give me 2 minutes, right, and I just want to cover off some of the key concepts to get everyone onto the same baseline, and then we'll go into some of the complexities of how this works in a lot of organizations around the world. So Frederick Laloux wrote a book called Reinventing Organizations. Now there's some controversy around the book, there's some controversy around the definitions and the classifications, but like all models, it is helpful but not necessarily true. Right? And so these are models of organizational structure. A red organization is one that Laloux classes as being authoritarian. Right? It is hierarchical, but not in the sense that we think of it. It is the organization of the chief, the organization of the boss man, that individual who controls everybody. It's hierarchical in that everybody reports to the boss. There's no structure. Right? It is just one degree of separation. But these are organizations that are generally led by fear or led by another very strong motivating factor. In today's world, gangs and criminal families will operate like this, but so will some startups. I've seen startups that have that cult of personality where everyone obeys that startup founder because of some love, respect, or fear in many cases. And these small companies obviously operate in this red domain. An amber organization is one that is what we would start to think of as hierarchical. It was the first kind of organization that emerged that allowed scale. Right? It is represented by the pyramid. It is represented by the hierarchy that well, we know and love today. Now, unlike the organizations that most of you probably work in, an AMBER organization is strict hierarchy. Right? It is the chain of command. You do not go across, you don't talk to peers in another silo, you go up, across, and down. Right? Organizations like the Catholic Church operate in this way. Jacques created the requisite organization model, which is in many ways an expression of formalized expression of an AMBER organization, though obviously it goes into orange. An orange organization is the matrix. It is still the pyramid, it's still the hierarchy, but where you create virtual teams across silos, and those virtual teams are designed to, what's the word I'm looking for? Those virtual teams are designed to create a commonality of purpose, right, within the organization. Now, we all know that these matrix organizations don't necessarily work effectively. I work for IBM. It is, no one will disagree with me when I say that IBM is a deeply orange organization. There are pockets of green and there are certainly pockets of amber, but this organization and this organizational construct comes with certain costs in terms of efficiency and in terms of achieving outcomes. It's very good at achieving outputs. It's very good at grouping people around work. And if you can presume you're doing the right work in the right way, then an orange organization works brilliantly. A green organization is the first of the agile organizations. Its metaphor is still that of the pyramid, but rather an upside down pyramid, an inverted one, where the leader is at the bottom. Right? This is the servant leader organization. There is still a hierarchy, right? But the structural lines provide support and empowerment. Green organizations often also are defined around outcomes. So those hierarchical silos are actually not around a function. You don't have a dev silo, a test silo, a HR silo, a finance silo, but rather you have teams who are accountable for a business outcome, right? And that is how they are structured. And the skills necessary within that to achieve the outcome, right, are all cross-functionally self-organized into those teams, into those silos. And obviously, I think everyone I'm speaking to has heard of the Spotify model, tribes, guilds, squads. These are some metaphors that are used and some models that are used to try and simplify some of these concepts. The teal organizations are it is the extreme case of potentially what an agile organization looks like. Now, I say that, and I also disagree with what I just said, and let me explain. A teal organization is one where it breaks the metaphor. It's no longer a pyramid, it's no longer a hierarchy in that sense of the word, but rather the predominant metaphor is a network, a directed graph, nodes, individual teams or individuals connected through a social contract or some sort of formal charter or contract with other teams to provide services and work. Now, most teal organizations do not define an org structure because it is dynamic. Right? Based on the demands of the organization and the ebb and flow of that value creation and as driven by customers, right? Individual teams and nodes and network connections will form or reform according to demand. And there are some really fascinating stories about teal organizations and how they work, and if we have time at the end I can tell some of my own personal experiences of where we've created teal and teal-like organizations. The strict expression of teal is very rare, right? Because that level of well, in many cases, no managers, or at least very light management, and truly network-based organizations are only just starting to emerge. Right? There are cases dating back 20 or 30 years, right? But in common mindset, they're relatively new. However, I want you to also think about your organization. Your organization is probably, it's probably an orange organization for most of you, maybe green if you're lucky, red if you're unlucky. As a side note, there is no value judgment against any of these organization classifications. An organization will be multiple colors at any given point in time, but there will be a predominant classification, right? And if the organization is successful, it means it has adopted the right structure for the market and the environment it operates within. If you're in a highly chaotic, hostile environment, then a red organization is probably the only one that will survive. Right? So I may make jokes about red and so forth, but do not presume that this is a pathway, a maturity of organizations to teal. Right? Teal is not the end. Teal is just one among many, one among equals. Right? So I just need to make that very clear. In terms of your organization, you're probably orange or green. Now, we say that, but most organizations still have a network effect within them, where if you have a piece of paper in front of you, draw yourself in the center, right? Your name, Evan, right? And then out to the left or the right, draw your boss, right? And then out to the other side, draw people who report to you, right? That's your structural network. But then around that, draw the little circles that define all of the teams that you engage with as part of your processes. All right, so your software delivery lifecycle. What other teams do you work with? All right, and you can draw it in a different color and see those connections. Then draw the goodwill connections. Who do you help? All right, not because you're part of your process, but because, well, you're nice people and you like helping people. So draw those connections in. Right? We can then draw connections around tools and all different communication pathways that exist within your organization. And it might seem a little unusual, but you have within your orange organization today a network organization. The difference is it is not part of the default expression of structure, but it exists. And if you understand that structure, if you just understand how that structure operates, then you are a long way towards creating an agile organization, right? Because it's not about the hierarchical structure, it's about the network. And that's really the key. Why? See another question?
Yeah, we're kind of like halfway through. There is a question, I believe it is from the slide before. Why do you feel the connection segment does not bear the depth of the other three? Is it safe to hope that we know it? I don't know if you're going to talk about this going further. Or...
Sorry, I'm not sure the question. Sorry, could you repeat?
Oh, the other. So why do you feel the connection segment does not bear the depth of the other two? Is it safe to hope that we know it?
Okay, so just to clarify, each domain is equal. There is no statement that says one is more important than the other. In fact, it's the exact opposite. We are saying that you need all of them to be successful. If you start an agile adoption, if you start applying Scrum, congratulations, you've got very strong process agility, all right? Good learning agility, maybe a little bit of collaboration. It's collaboration, but it's not enterprise-wide, all right? So 3-4 of the domains you've got covered, all right? But not market agility, not structural agility, all right? Not leadership agility. and certainly not to any depth. So all those benefits that you convince your manager and the organization they were going to get when they adopted Agile are gone. Or rather will not be realized because you'll be limited by the structure, by the leader, by the market, right, by the technical agility. Right? And so you need to have a focus on all 9. What I'm saying is that the connections dimension is underrepresented in Agile transformations, partly because it's actually kind of hard, it's the hard, well, the mindset's the hardest, but we know that. All right? But in terms of actually changing an organization, changing how you go to market is really difficult because it's not just one division anymore. You actually now have to start dealing with other parts of the organization. So leadership agility, structural agility, and market agility are very powerful, but very much underrepresented in transformations.
Okay, I guess we can continue then. Thank you.
And I'm sorry for my cat.
It's just a cute nuance on the webinar.
Yes, well, you have me at midnight, so yes. Okay. So let me show you this diagram. All right. So there's, I strongly recommend everyone Googles Valve Employee Handbook. It is a really good read. It's a couple of years old now. It's actually quite a few years old now. But it is a great understanding of the what you should experience when you join an agile organization. Right? And in their employee handbook, which is, you can download it from the internet, right? They have this chart. This is, as their employees have drawn up, what they see the organization structure to be. Right? Now, some people it's flat. Right? Some people see it as like a network. Some people see it as like distributed clusters with, of course, like the new guy out on the edge going, I don't know what I'm doing here. Okay, so it's when we talk about an agile organization, right? That structure and that structural agility needs to be dynamic, and if you miss on that dynamic nature of an organization, then you can't. Let me use a software example because you all should be familiar with that. Right? We have a product. We're building a website. We iterate. We have sprints. We do a review. The feedback comes in. We need to make a change. Great. Okay. We go in. We change the code. We refactor the code. Can you refactor your organization? Right? And I'll guarantee that for 90% of the people listening, the answer is no. But the answer should be yes. If you can't refactor your organization quickly, and I mean within days, I don't mean bring in consultants and do a restructure, right? And which takes 6 months and half the people lose their jobs. That's not what I'm saying. Refactoring the organization is to very quickly, within a couple of days, reorient, form new teams, dynamically create teams around new opportunities in the market, new challenges in the organization. If you can't do that, you can't call yourself an agile organization. Now, there's complexity. So let me give you an example of a company that wasn't born digital, like Valve. New Zealand Post Group. They are the postal service for the country of New Zealand. Right? It is a group of companies, which means multiple CEOs. You have the post office, you have couriers, there's a bank. Right? So it is a complex organization. It's also an old organization. Most post services predate the internet by usually a couple of centuries. This is an organization that uses a Kanban board across the for the executives, the group CEO, the CEOs of the group companies, and the various executives. Now, this is a couple of years old, right? And so I think things have changed since then. Right? But the way that they use this is very powerful. The board meetings are no longer the usual, okay, give us your submissions. We will go through, we'll create the agenda, and we'll just go through the items agenda by agenda. No, they've moved away from that. It is, let's look at the wall. Who's doing what? Where's it at? We'll focus on 2 things, and only 2 things today, 2 major issues. Right? The rest can wait till next week. It's about limiting the work in progress, even for that executive committee. Right? But here's the powerful thing about what they've done. Right? This is not just a board, by the way. It's a room. It's the boardroom. There is a Kanban board on every single wall, right? Showing different visualizations of the organization, different radars and information radiators. But anybody in the organization can walk into the room, and that is the most powerful thing. Right? I could be a post clerk, I could be a bank clerk, and I can go into the room and just see what's going on. Now, obviously, some things which are confidential, if I'm going through a merger or making people redundant, then of course I'm not going to show that. I'm not going to make that transparent, because there are some commercial realities. However, all right, I'm going to use a little bit of code. All right, this is Project Omega, but we know what that is, but we keep that under our belt. There are other organizations, right, that actually go so far as to make all of that transparent. All right, and some of these are even publicly listed companies. So in a publicly listed company, if you are part of the inner circle, if you're part of the people who are put on a particular trading list, right? You can't trade under certain conditions because it's effectively insider trading, right? So if you're the CEO of an organization and you know you're about to post a loss, you're not allowed to trade. You're not allowed to trade for several months before and after reporting. So in some of these agile organizations, the entire organization is read into that list. The entire organization has these bans from trading because that information about their financial performance is public information, or is public within the organization. There's no need to know. Everybody needs to know. Everyone, and that goes to salary information. And that's actually, sorry, a side note, that's a really interesting case. Right? When you have an organization where you know everybody's salary, and they know yours, it changes a lot of the dynamics around pay equality, right? It's very hard to make happen after the fact. So if you've had secret salary information, it can lead to resentment once you discover that your colleague has been earning twice what you do for the same job, right? However, for organizations that start this way, right, so that there is there's no surprising discrepancy, then it can be a very powerful motivating factor for the team to know it's when promotions, when pay rises, why pay rises, and what the financial performance of the company is. So this is the sort of stuff that an agile organization can start to do. Think about all the effort that goes into keeping information secret. Think about all the effort that goes into limiting people's access and going, oh, you shouldn't have known that, please forget you heard that. Right? No, an agile organization, some have secrets like NZPG and others do not. It depends on how you want to express that information and the consequence of expressing that information, and especially the consequence if you express it later in your agile journey than before. The next one I want to go through sort of very quickly, and this is a sort of a very basic squad structure that we use within IBM for some of the, and this is using the Spotify terminology. But here's the key, there's some key elements in this I just want to very quickly call out. The first of all is every squad, every team have business outcomes. Right? There is no definition of what the squad does, because that's up to the squad to decide. They decide like what they're going to create, how they're going to create it, what tools, what technologies, because we don't care. What we want is to know what business outcome, what is your measure for that business outcome, right? What is the current baseline number for that measure? What is the target? What do we want it to be? Right? And then, of course, there's other information about, like, is it a stable squad? Is it a temporary squad? Because sometimes we stand them up or down. Who are the relationships? The relationships is good because that tells us what our network diagram looks like inside an organization like IBM. Right? And, of course, the cadences, how do they actually work together? But it's this outcome box that is absolutely critical, because when a team knows what business outcomes they're owning, then we can actually have those powerful decisions about, well, agility, around what work we need to do to achieve them. Now, designing the right outcomes, that's a topic for another webinar. I'll spend an hour talking about how you design the right outcomes, but they can't be conflicting. They have to be aligned to mission and purpose. Money is not an outcome. Right? Money is an indicator. Right? So an outcome is not get revenue. It is not sign these new clients. Right? You don't become a doctor to make money. You become a doctor to save lives. Right? You make money in order to continue saving lives. Right? So profit is important, money is important, but it is not why you are in business, and it's not the outcome that you are looking for. The outcome is the why. Money is the indicator that you're actually successfully doing that why. I want to go through two last slides pretty quickly. This one is, most of you probably recognize, is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It is controversial. Not everyone agrees with Maslow, but like the Teal model, it's a model, and as a model, it is helpful. All right? My first job, when I was 14 and 9 months, which is the earliest you're allowed to work in Australia, I dressed up in a koala suit. I had a bucket, and I would go down to Circular Quay and Darling Harbour and harass tourists for money. I worked for the Wilderness Society. We were collecting donations. I got to keep a third of what I collected in my bucket, right? And that was my first job. Now, certainly, I had a certain affinity for the organization, which is why I sought them out. But I won't necessarily say I had high esteem in that organization dressed in a koala suit. Right? Likewise, I certainly wasn't actualized in that company. So our first jobs are minimum wage. Our first jobs are survival. Right? I got that job because I needed to eat. I got that job because I needed to pay rent. Right? Well, I was 16 before I needed to pay rent, but you get the idea. However, an agile organization takes those off the table. Right? I want you actualized. I want you esteemed. I want love and belonging. Right? Because I want you to feel joy in your work. There's a great example. There's a company in the UK called Timpson's. They do key cutting, shoe repair, which is about as blue collar as it gets. But they would very much be considered to be an agile organization. Right? Yes, they pay minimum wage, but they do little things like, if you're under financial stress, right? I don't want you feeling financial stress at work. A, because you're going to do a bad job, and B, you're actually more likely to steal from the till. Right? Go, oh, you're not going to miss that $5. It's, oh, I need that more. Right? So I put that in my pocket. No. Right? So let's take money off the equation. I'm not going to give you as much money as you need, but look, here's $500. Here's a bonus. Here's a loan. Go pay that bill. Don't worry about it. Come to work. Focus on your work. Don't focus on the fact that you're in debt or you have that money that's outstanding. We take that off the table. Focus on your work. And that's a fantastic way of getting engagement. And Timpson's has some of the best employee stats of anywhere in the world, let alone a shoe repair key cutting store. I will share some links after this to some of what they do, and it's some really great reading. So I definitely recommend you have a look. The other one that I want you to understand is the trust pyramid. Right? The reason this is here is because an agile organization requires trust. Right? And I don't mean that in any sort of flippant way. I mean, if you don't have it, you can't be agile. Blunt. Reference-based trust. I trust you because Yelp says you're a good plumber. I trust you because a friend has referred you to me. Right? Contract-based trust. I trust you because, well, I don't trust you. I trust the contract. Right? Likewise with reference-based trust, I don't trust you. I trust the referrer. Now, most organizations, most relationships, and this doesn't have to be client-vendor. This can be inside an organization, two divisions. Right? I trust the contract, not you. That could be a project plan rather than a formal contract, but I trust the document. Now, I can't be agile if I don't trust you. Right? And so what we need is to build a level of identification-based trust. I trust you because I've worked with you, and, well, you've earned my trust. Let's take the plumber as an example. Right? The first time I work with a plumber, I don't trust them. Right? I want to know what they're going to get. I want to know what it's going to cost. Right? The second time, the third time, you've done a good job. I really like what you've done. Look, my budget's 10 grand. What can you do with that? All right? Or, you know what? That sounds like an interesting idea. Let's experiment. Let's iterate. Right? I'm going to iterate I'm doing a renovation. I'm going to try a few new things with someone I trust. And so that identification level of trust is fundamentally important when building an agile organization. And we often also actually try and quantify the level of trust that we have. Partnership's a special case. Partnership is where the outcomes are intertwined. And if you don't have the same outcome, right, then, well, it's not a true partnership. So I just want to leave you with this thought. In an agile organization isn't easy. It is something that you have to work at. It is something that you need to strive towards building. Right? Think of those 9 domains. Right? Those 9 domains tell you not what to do or how to do it, but just where to look. And if your agile transformation, if your adoption program, or just even you think you're agile, right? Look at those 9 and go, have we remove those constraints, or are we happily agile in our little bubble, right? Our little bubble of agile, but how does the rest of the organization interface? How does that, are we compromising agility? Where is that constraint? And sometimes you just have to start. It's like, okay, I don't know where to start, but doesn't matter. Start anywhere, pick one of the 9. Try starting from that, and then look for the next constraint, see what it changes, experiment. And an agile organization, a learning organization, is one that is willing to experiment, is one that's willing to make that change. So I will leave you there and go to questions now. This is obviously a topic that's I have a huge amount of passion for, and I've seen organizations over the last 7, 8, 9 years start to move in this direction. IT companies, obviously, but banking, finance companies, manufacturing companies, energy companies, retail companies. This is no longer just an IT software battle. This is the battle for the hearts and minds of companies. It's the very core of what makes us agilists.
Well, on that note, then. I think you struck curiosity on some of our attendees here. Can you give examples where the various colors on the reinventing organization, the colors there, are optimal with probably the organizations that you have seen, and how did that work on those organizations?
Okay, so I've not seen a red organization work, but primarily because I've never been in a war zone. I've never been in a highly chaotic environment. When I've seen red organizations, they've been dysfunctional, because in a stable environment like Australia or Singapore or Canada, that authoritarian cult of leadership, cult of the individual, tends to lead to poor behavior and poor outcomes. And just look at the failings of some of the recent startups. Uber springs to mind, and how that when that dominant personality, that authoritarian approach comes into play, how the organizations struggle. Now, if I was in Beirut, or if I was in Palestine, I'm sure a red organization would have a lot more benefits. Likewise with Amber, you don't see very often these days, and the main reason is because most organizations have gone from Amber to Orange. It's a very easy switch, and mainly because of the effectiveness in doing work. Right? Amber organizations allow you to scale. Orange organizations allow you to scale efficiently, effectively. Right? Because you can virtually group people to achieve specific tasks which you wouldn't normally be able to do. So Orange, I won't give you examples because every organization that you can think of is Orange, right? IBM, right? Microsoft, although that's going greeny, right? But it's still predominantly Orange. Most airlines, most retail companies, Orange is a predominant metaphor. Now, green's interesting, all right? Okay, Spotify, there's one, all right? But places like Southwest Airlines, Ben & Jerry's, companies that put the community and preference the mission over the money would, in many cases, be classified as green. USAA, I was in America the other week talking with them, and I would say that whilst structurally they've still got a while to go and they're an insurance company, I would say that their mission alignment and the emphasis puts them heavily into the green space. So it's probably one of those cases where it's structurally orange but mission green, and the tension in the organization comes from that dichotomy of they haven't quite got that balance right. Teal organizations, right, few and far between, right? Morningstar is one of the ones that I know quite well. Tomato processing factory, right? Raw tomatoes in one end, tinned tomatoes at the other, 4,000 employees, no managers. And all based on social contracts, working agreement between people upstream and downstream of that. There are a lot of sort of agile consultancies which are starting to style themselves as teal organizations, but to be honest, they're probably more cooperatives than they are teal. It's just the way they position themselves rather than actual true engagement. Though some organizations do really try and adopt a lot of those attributes of a teal organization. One thing I will say is that the key characteristics of teal is the leadership. Right? If you cannot be teal without your leaders being teal. Right? They've got to exude those characteristics and that way of working. And what happens is organizations where the leadership changes for whatever reason will actually undo all of that and go into another state, green or orange. There's a good case in Australia. Suncorp Bank was never teal, but I would probably call it green. It was an agile organization. It was a bank insurance company in Australia, and they spent 10 years building an agile organization. Agile audit, agile HR. They were doing it 10 years ago. Right? They built up this massive agile organization, and then the CEO left, and a new CEO came in, and this new CEO didn't have the same values as the previous one. And so, without necessarily deliberately doing so, within about 6 months had undone that mentality and the approach. And so, in fact, IBM, we hired half of Suncor's coaches and executives after fact because we wanted what they had. But once again, ironically, that company, Suncor, has sort of realized the error of their ways and are now trying to hire all the coaches and all that agile back into the organization. But what took them 10 years to build, 6 months to destroy, is going to take them another 5 years to build. It takes that time to rebuild it.
So we have about 4 questions waiting, so maybe we can go a little quicker because we have only 6 minutes left.
Right.
So maybe just like a quick answer. The next question is around a little bit talking about creating this network in a hierarchical organization. Yeah. So can we just create the network without breaking the hierarchy, or
So,
how do you see that?
clarification, the network already exists. What you need to do is visualize it, draw it out. Find the network that currently exists. Right? You're not breaking anything because it's there. Right? And once you understand it, draw a line around it. Right? Where is your sphere of influence in that network? Right? And you can use that to look at your constraining factors to agility. So, okay, let's say HR is my constraining factor. Great, there's HR in that network map, but my sphere of influence does not cover HR. So I know I need to work on something in order to cover HR with my sphere of influence. The network already exists, right? So just use it and use that to promote agility.
Okay. The next one is from John. Can you comment more on specific challenges in the finance sector to adopt an organizational agility?
Let me give you two common ones, procurement and budgeting. Procurement models tend to, based on our legal system and our finance system, work at a level of contract-based trust and require fixed price, fixed scope, fixed everything. That obviously is in opposition to an agile way of working, and you really need to work with your procurement and finance organizations to change their procurement model towards something more agile. T&M is the obvious one, but many organizations feel that that puts all the risk on them and none of the risk on their partner. But there are other models around shared outcomes or putting other commitments in place which are not scope based, commitments around ROI, commitments around quality, and commitments around minimum viable product type thing. The other one's about budgeting, and let me just say, have a look at the Beyond Budgeting book, if that's something that is of interest to you. The idea of funding value streams, funding continuous flows rather than an annual budget cycle is a very agile way of looking at budgets and finance, and it's a must read for any business agilist.
Okay. I'm gonna group the last two questions in one. Maybe you can address them both. One is someone is getting the sense that it sounds like an organization should aspire and work towards orange, then green, then teal as it grows. And the other one is, are we saying that there is a need to underpin a teal organization with values?
So to answer the first question, absolutely not. They are not, it's not a pathway, it's not a roadmap, it's not a ladder. These are just classifications like wizard, druid, and bard, right? One is not better than the other, right? Except wizards. Wizards are always better. But the point is, these are just ways that we look at and can see structure and the values of an organization. In the right context, the right model, the color is the most appropriate one. Right? Teal is appropriate in some circumstances and inappropriate in many others. Right? So I will, however, say, right, that if you want an agile organization, then green and teal should be your goals. Right? Not because green and teal are the best, but just because those are the agile models. Right? Orange, amber, red, right, you can be agile within it, but they themselves do not promote agility in the very structure, right? Just because of the nature of the structure. The second point about values, yes, teal organizations and green agile organizations are values-based in most cases. They set principles and guidelines, like the Agile Manifesto, right, that say this is what we stand for, and those principles and guidelines act as guardrails, so that when people are empowered, they're empowered to make those decisions, They're empowered to decide what to do to achieve those outcomes, but the values provide the constraints that stop them from doing something fundamentally wrong. Right? So the values of that organization and making them explicit is critical.
Okay. Thank you, Evan. I'm gonna take the screen right now and just close the webinar. Thank you so much. This was very interesting information and conversation, and sparked a lot of good questions.
No, thank you. It's been a pleasure, and please connect with me on LinkedIn if you want to talk more about these topics.
Absolutely. For everyone that is attending, thank you for being part of this. Thank you for your questions. Please make sure that you are following us, and we are want to bring to you more and more webinars like this. Stay tuned for our next webinars by subscribing to our list. Our Toronto Agile Conference on November 7 is open for submissions, and very soon is going to be officially open even for registration. So be the first one to join us. We always want your feedback for this webinar or for future webinars, so please use our website or follow us on Twitter. Thank you, Evan, so much again. Thank you, everyone. And that's it for today.